This evening, I want to speak to you for a while on the subject of dedication, sanctification, or commitment. Under the law, priests and the temple were dedicated to the service of God, but under grace, Christians occupy that high and holy position. Probably I can illustrate commitment better than I can discuss it abstractly. Adolf Hitler, I'm sure, was a madman, but he had a trait in his life which I think each one of us should seek to emulate. He was a devoted man. He was dedicated to the tenets of National Socialism. He took a country about the size of Texas and overran Western Europe and North Africa. He was knocking at the gates of Moscow when he began to experience his first serious military reverses. Had not Hitler taken on the combined force of the communists and the free world, he might have been successful in realizing his ambitions. Rather than accept unconditional surrender, he allowed his country to be reduced to shambles. And rather than yield himself to the Russians, he put the business end of a German Luger into his mouth, and he blew out his brains. When I was a boy, I heard Hitler speak on the radio and by means of the newsreels at the local theater. And even though I didn't understand a word of German, he raised goose pimples on me. Hitler was a preacher, and he was a successful preacher of the devilish doctrines of Nazism. I've sometimes wondered how much good he could have done for Christ had he been as devoted to saving souls as he was to the ruination of the world. Hitler was a dedicated person. Say what you will about him, none here can deny that. The communists are a dedicated people. I think it was in 1916 when the Germans released Lenin and a dozen followers, and they were rightly regarded as a group of wild-eyed fanatics. In 1917, they took control of a legitimate revolution which had arisen in Russia. And just 62 years later, we see that the communists are controlling about a third of the Earth's population. More than 1 billion people are living behind the iron of the bamboo curtains. These folk exist under the red heel of totalitarianism. Well, how do you explain the communists being able to accomplish so much in such a short period of time? I think the answer is to be found in their commitment or their dedication to the cause. Years ago, there was a debate between the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks. And the Mensheviks said anyone who wants membership in our party should be granted it. The Bolsheviks said only those who are committed to our ideals ought to be granted membership to the party. And the Bolsheviks won the debate. History has proved the correctness of their position. One cannot be a communist unless he eats, drinks, and sleeps their philosophy. The average communist would make the average Christian look like an idiot in comparison. And you may think that I'm somewhat of a pessimist, but I think I'm a realist. I am convinced we will lose to these people unless or until we have a similar measure of commitment for Jesus Christ, the New Testament, the church, and the free institutions that make our country great. I believe that wholehearted commitment to error generally will triumph over half-hearted commitment to truth. We've read so many books and we've seen so many movies which ended, and they lived together happily ever after, so that we simply do not think these people could beat us. I want you to know I'm not primarily fearful of their military prowess. The thing that frightens me is they are deadly serious about their philosophy. And it's primarily a battle of ideals, primarily a battle of concepts. And generally, unless we are given to truth, we will lose to someone who is totally given to error. And I might say this as an aside. I would far rather see an individual in the kingdom of God with little ability and great commitment than to see one in the kingdom of God with great ability and little commitment. I am convinced the one with little ability and total devotion to the Lord's will do more in the long run to advance the kingdom than one with great ability but who has little dedication to the cause. Mahatma Gandhi was a devoted man. He graduated from Oxford University with a degree in law. He was a successful lawyer in India. He was making $12,000 a year in India then, and that was big money then. It's big money there now. But he scrapped his degree. He gave up his law practice. He wrapped himself in a bedsheet and he shook the British Empire from center to circumference because he was a man of one idea, namely independence for India. And she's an independent nation today primarily because of his efforts. The 12 apostles were devoted or dedicated men. Most of them never saw the inside of a college or a university. And yet just 32 years after the establishment of the church, in Colossians 1, Paul said, the gospel had been preached to all creation. Now, they did that without benefit of radio, TV, newspapers, airplanes, automobiles, railroads, and steamships. Someone might say, yes, but they did it because they had the ability to work miracles. their miraculous power without commitment to the task would not have done what they did. And I am convinced if you and I had the dedication today they had then, we could do today what they did then. And if not, why not? I presented a bachelorette address to a graduating class of 6. Only 5 showed up. I think he must have known who was going to do the talking. But anyhow, I said to those 6, if I had the ability to set you on fire as the Lord inflamed the apostles, surely in a lifetime you'd be able to accomplish half as much good as they did. I think that's right. John Wesley once said, you give me 300 men who fear nothing but God, hate nothing but sin, and know nothing but Jesus Christ and Him crucified, and I'll set the world on fire. And Wesley was right. Why did the apostles set the world on fire? Because they feared nothing but God, they hated nothing but sin, and they knew nothing but Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Paul was a devoted man. I think I've said it earlier in the meeting, and I repeat, except for Jesus, I think He's the greatest man who ever walked. He was scarred from the top of His head to the sole of His feet. He was driven from pillar to post. He knew the meaning of persecution and tribulation and hardship. He was counted as the filth and the offscouring of the world. But not anything deterred that old man. He said in Romans 15 that he was not going to build on anyone else's foundation. And in that same chapter he said that he had preached the gospel from Jerusalem to Illyricum. And I read the Bible for years before it ever dawned on me to ask, well, so what? He preached the gospel from Jerusalem to Illyricum. Next time you read those verses, take a look at a map. From Jerusalem to Illyricum is all around the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea, as far north as Illyricum or Dalmatia. And I know from the Bible eventually he went to Rome. He wanted to go to Spain. And according to one of the early church fathers, he went to the western extremity. And most scholars think that he did go to Spain. If he went to Spain, he preached all along the northern edge of the Mediterranean and all around the eastern edge of the Mediterranean as far south as Jerusalem. He traveled thousands of miles, established scores of congregations, converted hundreds of people to Jesus. Why? Because he was devoted to the task. He was dedicated to doing his duty. The greatest example of dedication is Jesus. When he was 12, if there are any 12-year-olds, I ask you to notice the language. When he was 12, he said, I must be about my Father's business. And I think a 12-year-old brought up in a Christian home ought to be able to say the same thing. I must be about my Father's business. When he was 30, he was baptized to fulfill all righteousness. And he used to wonder why he waited until he was 30. I wouldn't encourage anyone else to wait until he or she is 30. It dawned on me that he did it just about as soon as he could, because he couldn't be baptized until John began his mission. And in the providence of God, that was the Lord's arrangement. But at any rate, he was baptized to fulfill righteousness. The night before he died, he said, nevertheless, not as I will, but as thou wilt. That young man, Jesus, did more good than any other young man who's ever lived. He did more good than any group of young men who have ever lived. But he was the Son of God. His being the Son of God without commitment to the task would not have done what he did. In John chapter 4, he was talking to his apostles, and he said, I have meat to eat of which you do not know. Where's his meat? Where's his food? He said, it's my meat to do the will of him that sent me and to finish his work. He ate, drank, and slept the will of God. He was dominated by it. And because he was dominated with the will of God, he split history apart. And he has left his mark upon the world forever. Well, we've seen examples of devotion and dedication outside the Bible and inside the Bible. The question now is, does God expect that kind of radicalism of you and me today? Let me read a few passages and see. In Matthew 5:28, Jesus said, whosoever shall look upon a woman to lust after her hath committed adultery with her already in his heart. And I say unto you, if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. Now we have correctly interpreted those verses to mean that we must control our eyes and we must control our hands. But suppose we had to interpret them literally. We cannot do God's will with this eye or this hand. Then give them up. That sounds like commitment. Sounds like fanaticism. In Matthew 6:19-21, lay not up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust doth corrupt, and thieves break through and steal. But lay up yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust doth corrupt, and thieves do not break through and steal. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. That sounds like dedication too. In Matthew 8:21, one of his disciples came to him and said, "Suffer me first to go and bury my father." And Jesus said, "Follow me, let the dead bury their dead." I think that young man's daddy was still living. I think he was in bad health. And the boy was saying, "He's sick, he won't last much longer. I intend to give him a decent burial, and then I'll follow you." Well, shouldn't young people be concerned about their parents? Yes. Should they be concerned about taking care of them in their old age? Yes. Should they be concerned with giving them a decent burial? Yes. But that boy was using his daddy as an excuse for not following the Lord. "I'll follow you after I take care of my dad's needs." Jesus said, "Oh no, that won't work." He said, "You follow me, let the dead spiritually bury those who are dead physically." He wouldn't accept that boy's daddy as an excuse. That sounds like fanaticism. In Matthew 10, beginning at verse 33, Jesus said, "Think not that I am come to bring peace upon the earth. I came not to bring peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's foe shall be they of his own household. He that loveth father and mother more than me is not worthy of me, and he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not up his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. And he that findeth his life shall lose it, and he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it." Man, what language. The Lord said we simply cannot put anything or anyone ahead of Him. That sounds like commitment. Sounds like the language of dedication. Sounds like fanaticism, which the Lord expects of His followers. According to Matthew 19, beginning at verse 16. Rich young ruler went to Jesus, fell down before Him, asked Him what to do to enter into life. The Lord said, "Keep the commandments." "Which ones?" Well, the Lord replied, "Thou shalt do no murder, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness. Honor thy father and thy mother, love thy neighbor as thyself. These I've kept from my youth up. What lack I yet?" And Jesus said, "If you be perfect or full grown or complete, go and sell what you have, give to the poor, come follow me, you have treasures in heaven." The young man went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. Jesus didn't follow him a step. He didn't beg him. He didn't plead with him. He set forth the demands. The boy wouldn't meet him, and he let him go. Sounds like commitment again. Sounds like dedication. According to Luke 14, he told a parable about building a tower. He said, if you intend to build a tower, you'd better sit down first of all and count the cost, or you may have the foundation laid and then run out of money. Your friends will ridicule and make fun of you, saying you started to build, but you were not able to finish. Somewhere in this community, maybe several somewheres, there is a foundation on which no house has been built. And our Lord said, that's like an individual who starts to be my disciple. But all that happens is he believes, he repents, he's baptized, but he doesn't move any further. He's laid the foundation, but he's unwilling to count the cost of what's actually involved. There is a cost. There is a price to be paid. And anyone who thinks that it's always simple and easy to be a Christian hasn't tried it very long. It's the hardest thing under God's sun I ever tried. And it is difficult. Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote a book entitled The Cost of Discipleship. I believe I'm correct in saying that he died in that Nazi concentration camp in 1944. But in the book he says there is no cheap grace. And he says when Christ calls a man, He calls him to die. And that's right. When He calls a person, He calls that person to die. This evening I want to make one more point. Now, it's going to take me a few minutes to make it, and you probably knew that. I have given examples of commitment. I think I have established from the Word of God that the Lord intends for us to be a dedicated people. And now I want to raise and answer this question. Are we a committed people? And many years ago I worked out a little threefold test for my own benefit that may be of help to you. And this threefold test relates to my relationship to the Lord Jesus Christ. Number one, if I am devoted to Christ, I will be characterized by right motives. In 1 Corinthians 13, 1-3, Paul said, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not love, I'm become as sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not love, it profiteth me nothing. I submit to you that's one of the most frightening passages in all of the New Testament, because it brings influence to bear upon my motive. You see, it isn't enough for Christians to say, hey, look what we're doing. Now, it is important to be doing something. But in addition to doing something, we must also ask, why am I doing it? Paul states in 1 Corinthians 13 that a man might speak with angelic language, but if he did it for some reason other than a love for God and a love for his fellows, he's like clanging cymbals in a band. Now, if you have played the cymbals, or if you are playing the cymbals now, I don't intend to reflect on you at all. But I've always had a sneaking suspicion that I could play the cymbals. I just felt like that if someone had pointed at me at the right time, I could hit those things together. And a fellow may be able to sway an audience of thousands or tens of thousands, but if he does it for some reason other than love for God and love for his fellows, he's wasting his time. One might be able to exercise miraculous gifts, but if he does it for some reason other than love for God and love for others, then to use Paul's language, he's a zero, he's a cipher, he's a nothing. One might make great sacrifices, bury himself in the trackless jungles of Africa, give his body in a martyr's death, but if he does it for some reason other than love for God and love for his fellows, it profits nothing. Nothing. From our perspective, two individuals are doing the same thing, but from God's viewpoint, they are not, because they don't have the same motivation. Barnabas sold a piece of property. He took the money, laid it at the feet of the apostles to be distributed among the needy. Ananias and Sapphira sold a piece of property. They took a part of the money, placed it at the feet of the apostle Peter to be distributed among the needy. Barnabas was blessed by God and men. Ananias and Sapphira fell dead. Well, they did the same thing. Oh, no, they didn't. What Barnabas did, he did because he loved God and he loved his poor brethren. What Ananias and Sapphira did, they did because they wanted the acclaim and the applause of people. They didn't have the same motivation. What does a kiss indicate? Oh, a kiss indicates love all the time. Sometimes it indicates lust. What was a kiss when Judas placed it upon the Lord's cheek? What was it there? Why, Jesus responded by saying, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss? Kiss, a sign of love, mark of betrayal. You see, the Lord knew his motive, and the Lord knows our motives. The brethren who lead this congregation gave me my check today. I started to leave town. Already got the check, might as well get out of town, see? And I looked at that check and I almost fainted. Woo! Neale, they pay better for meetings than they used to. So I'm sure you and Jerry are looking forward to the future. But anyhow, I can remember, I want to say this for the benefit of some of our older elders. First time I came here for an 8-day, 2-Sunday meeting, I paid for that one. Now, I did that literally. I not only lost 2 weeks' salary at home, I didn't even get enough away from home to make up for what I'd given up. Well, let me tell you, brethren paid me well this time. And they're not just doing it for me, they do it for men who hold their meetings. Well, that raised an important question. Hey, Jim, why are you preaching? For money? Boy, if you are, you better get out of it. You better get out of it. Now, don't misunderstand me. I believe in paying a preacher. And he's paying him well. One of my favorite chapters in the New Testament is 1 Corinthians 9. That's on this subject. But when preachers are dominated primarily by financial considerations, they're in the wrong business. They're in the wrong business. And we all have to ask ourselves, why are we doing what we're doing? What's our motivation for it? And you have to do that as well. My wife and I have discussed this money thing. I'd like to think that I would preach if I were paid nothing. If an individual can be paid to preach, he can be paid not to preach. And I'd like to think that I would speak and share the unsearchable riches of Jesus regardless of any monetary considerations. Test number 2. Double-mindedness will be excluded. In James 1:5 following, the writer said, If any among you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who giveth to all men liberally, and upbraideth not, and it shall be given him. But let him ask in faith, nothing wavering. For he that wavereth is like a wave of the sea, driven by the wind and tossed. For let not that man think that he shall receive anything of the Lord. A double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. In Matthew 6:24, Jesus said, No man can serve 2 masters. For he'll either love the one and hate the other, or he'll cleave to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. It can't be done. In that same chapter, just 2 or 3 verses earlier, Jesus commended the single eye. We can't be a double-minded people. When Elijah the prophet came before the Israelites, and I spoke on this Tuesday night, I think, he asked, How long do you halt between the 2 opinions? If the Lord is God, serve Him. If Baal is God, serve Him. And he was telling them they could not be double-minded. Just can't be. McKnight is an unusual person. I think after the Almighty made him, He threw the pattern away. And Mid says that a lot of us in the kingdom have the same attitude about Jesus and Christianity we do towards smallpox. Smallpox vaccine. Just enough of it in us to be immune to the real thing. Always miserable. Always wretched. Always torn between the 2. Never can make up our minds. I am convinced that a committed person will cease to be double-minded. I think that'll be excluded. And thirdly, when a committed person looks to Jesus, he says, He means more to me than anyone or anything in the world. No one fakes this. You can't fake it. It's where the rubber meets the road. It's true, genuine, and real, or it isn't. But when I finally stand before God in the day of judgment, the important question is going to be, what was your attitude toward my son? That's what it's going to be. David in Psalms 9:1 said, I will praise Thee, O Lord, with my whole heart. Psalms 119, verse 10, With my whole heart have I sought Thee. Psalms 119, verse 58, I entreated Thy favor with my whole heart. In Ecclesiastes 12, verse 13, fear God and keep His commandments. This is the whole duty of man. Matthew 6:33, seek ye first the kingdom of God and His righteousness, and all of these things will be added unto you. The Lord said He has to be first. I believe a lot of people are seeking Jesus in the kingdom who will never find Him. Because Christ and the kingdom are second or third or fifth or 10th or 20th. Christ is first place in my life or no place. It's true He was born in a stable. But you and I won't crowd Him into a stable tonight. He reigns from the palace of our hearts, or He simply does not reign at all. No half-hearted man or woman can walk with a wholehearted Christ. We sing the hymn, Jesus is all the world to me. My life, my joy, my all. He is my strength from day to day. And without Him I would fall. And we must live in harmony with the import of that song. He must be all the world to us. The late David Lloyd George, former Prime Minister of England, said, the most dangerous thing is to attempt to leap a chasm at 2 jumps. There's some wisdom in that. You see, don't jump halfway across and then jump again. You either jump all the way across or you don't jump across at all. But there's one thing more dangerous. And that's to attempt to be a Christian without being a Christian. That's even more dangerous. I've said repeatedly that I was brought up about 30 miles north of here on the banks of White River. And back in those days, there were no dams on the upper part of the river, and consequently, it didn't take it so long to get warm. And in the early spring, a group of us fellows would go to the river for the first swim to see who could back out the other. Fellow standing on the bank, his feet in the water. Man, that's cold. Another one come barreling down the bank, jump into the water, kersplash, wet head, ears, and all. As far as the illustration is concerned, we need to be like the latter of these two. We need to just jump into the water and get wet all over. And do you know that's going to be the only answer? The anxieties, the frustrations, the disappointment, the misery, and the wretchedness we experience. It's just to jump into it and just get wet all over. Just let go and let God have His way. And then we'll be happy. That's what it's all about. I know that's true because I've experienced it to some degree in my life, and I've also experienced the wretchedness in my life. Did you hear about the fellow who stretched a tight wire across Niagara Falls, and then he rolled a wheelbarrow across the wire and over the falls? And there were people who saw what he did, and they gave him a round of applause, thought it was marvelous. He said, how many of you think I could put a man in that wheelbarrow and roll him across? Hands went up all over the place. He said, all right, one of you jump in, let's go. He didn't get a taker, not a one. Oh, they believed he could do it, but they were unwilling to commit themselves to His care. And a lot of us may be convinced that Jesus can do it, but until we commit ourselves to His care, we're not really a devoted people. Dedicated people are willing to say that He means more to me than anyone or anything else. Now, I want to say it for all of us, but I want to say it, I suppose, primarily for the young people. I want someone to read the New Testament and show me how, on the basis of God's Word, that I can be loyal to Jesus while being disloyal to His spiritual body, the church. I want someone to show me how that can be done. This business about Christ, yes, and church, no, I have never understood. But man, the church is people. That's right. Well, people make a lot of mistakes. Paul majored in criticizing his brethren. I pretty well majored in it myself. We don't have to accept the mistakes of the brethren. The brethren are not always right. But I guarantee you one thing, they're always the church. They're the church. And how one can be loyal to Jesus and totally ignore the church beats me. And there are some who talk about how grand and how glorious it is to be right with Jesus. They don't attend church. They don't make contributions. They don't help with the teaching program. After all, they got this personal thing going between themselves and the Lord, and that's it. If that's your attitude toward the church, let me tell you, if it's right, every one of us can exercise that same attitude and be right. All right, what happens to foreign mission work? What happens to the Lord's Supper on the first day of the week? What do you think it would take to eliminate the Masonic Lodge? To discontinue lodge meetings? That'd be the end of it. What do you think it'll take to wipe out the movement of Christ on the earth? To discontinue church meetings, and it'll die. The writer of the Hebrew letter knew that. And that's why he said in Hebrews 10:25, don't you forsake the assembly. I don't believe you can be loyal to Jesus while being disloyal to the church for which He shed His blood. I don't believe that. In conclusion, what I've said tonight was not intended to discourage anyone. And these remarks could be taken in a discouraging note. Someone could walk out here and say, well, you know, Jim just made it so tough. He's talking about perfection. He's talking about sinlessness, and it's obvious I can't make it because I'm too weak. I don't believe the church is a place for supermen and superwomen. I believe it's a hospital for sinners. Someone said it's not a museum of plaster saints, but a hospital for sinners. And I'm not talking about perfection. I'm not talking about sinlessness. I want to mention a fellow. I'm going to call his name. And when I call his name, you think just as quickly as you can, what would you relate to him? You ready? The Apostle Peter. Now, what hits you first? I'm going to tell you what hit some of us first. His denial of Jesus. He denied the Lord 3 times. Third denial was accompanied with an oath. That's what we thought of. Do you believe the Apostle Peter was a dedicated man? Why, according to tradition, he was crucified head downward for him. Sure, he was devoted. Was he sinless? Huh. Who do you identify with in the New Testament? I identify more readily with Peter than any other character. You see, he's kind of like I am. He had hoof and mouth disease too. And so I can identify with him. Devoted yet sinless? If you're going to find someone sinless, you wouldn't take the Apostle Peter. But if you wanted a fellow who for the most part had a good heart, man, he was right out there in the forefront ready to cut someone's head off for the Lord. When everybody else was asking, shall we smite with a sword? Shall we smite with a sword? He's already cutting. You know, what's his name? Red Skelton? Yeah, you know, tickled at my own. All right, here's another one. The Apostle John. Oh, see him? Bless his heart. He's just so calm and cool, and he's sitting there at the desk, and he's writing a letter about love. Don't you see him? Hair's real white, and he never gets ruffled. Listen to this. Jesus called him a son of thunder. It was John who wanted one of the prominent places in the kingdom. It was John that asked Jesus to call down the fire from heaven and burn the Samaritans to a crisp. And even when he was an old man, according to tradition, he was in a bathhouse, I think at Ephesus, and Cerinthus, a heretic, came into that bathhouse, and he ran out because he's scared to death the place would fall in on him. Devoted? You bet he was devoted. And he came to be the great apostle of love that you and I know. But he was not sinless. If I had the time and the disposition, I could quote one verse to you in one of his epistles where he said 5 times in one verse that he was a sinner. One verse. That's pretty stout, isn't it? And he wrote that when probably he was 85 or 90 years of age. What is commitment then? It's an attitude. It's an attitude. Do you remember how you felt the day you became a Christian? Do you remember the attitude you had when you were baptized? I thought by the grace of God, the day I became a Christian, in the next 6 months, I'd convert at least half the world. You know how many I got the next 6 months? That's it right there. I mean, not a soul. Now, the 6 months after that, I began to be productive. But I was surrendered. I wanted to do what was right. And the attitude we had the day we began to serve Jesus is the attitude we must maintain all of our lives. That's commitment. It's surrender. Submission. It's yielding to His will at home, at school, in the business, in the community, on a date, or just wherever. It's saying, Lord, I'm going to follow you. I'm going to serve you with all of my heart. And after all, that's the only hope we have. Because it's that kind of faith that's reckoned to you and me as righteousness. And when God sees us, because we have that kind of faith, that kind of humility before God, we're counted as a sinless people. And when we die, we go to heaven. And so tonight I ask you about your dedication, about your commitment, about your sanctification. And if you've been half-hearted, haven't really been involved, I urge you to surrender. Surrender again. Start all over. And if you're one who has never been baptized into Jesus, I'm asking you for that right attitude, that surrender, that yielded will. Let Him have His way in your heart and in your life. This is the last night of our short meeting. If you haven't made your decision up until now, I'm hopeful you will make it tonight. I know of one young man who is to be baptized. And so if that's your decision this evening, you'll not be alone. And I know of a young lady who is contemplating being baptized. Maybe 2 young ladies who are contemplating being baptized. Because I've spent about an hour and a half today with them. Of course, they could come to the second service. I know this young man's at first service. If you want to come back for restoration and renewal, I hope you'll do it tonight. We're going to sing 131. And as we sing, we ask you to come. Won't you do it right now? Let's stand together.